Okay, now we have a beginnings of a REST API. We have a get messages method which returns a list of hard-coded messages. We will obviously enhance this to be able to get a particular message, to be able to update a message, to create a new message and all that stuff. The problem, however, is this message service that this resource is calling, right? So I have a get all messages method, which is hard-coded, right? So there are a couple of messages that I've hard-coded. Now this will not do. I'll have to enhance this service to be able to support all those operations, right? The key, the get particular message, update a message, delete a message, all that stuff. And I also talked about not using a database for this. I don't want to get involved in all the database connectivity, SQL queries, and all that nonsense. I want to be able to stub. In a way, they're kind of like fake methods, but they are something that our resource class can call, right? So I could have a set of methods with just print statements so that we know that those methods are called. We don't really worry about whether a message is being saved or whatnot. But I went a step further. I have decided to use an in-memory set of objects to act as a database. So that's what we're going to do in this tutorial. We're going to enhance the message service to support all the CRUD operations. And when we are done with this lesson, we'll have a message service class that looks like this. There is a getAllMessages method, which returns a list of messages. There is a getParticularMessage, which accepts a long, which is the ID, and returns that message. There is an addMessage method, which takes in a message object and adds it to the database, and it returns that message that was added. UpdateMessage similarly takes a message as an argument and then returns that message, the updated message. RemoveMessage takes an ID, which is the long ID, as an argument, and then it removes that message from the database and it returns the message that was removed, right? So these are the basic methods that we need in our message service. Now, again, how you want to implement it is up to you. You could system.out.println for all these methods and just print that, hey, this method is called with this argument, and that's all we would need, right? Again, we are learning a Jersey, we are learning JAX-RS, we're not learning how to connect to a database and insert records. So if you want to just do println statements, that's fine. You can actually skip this lesson. But in the rest of this lesson, I'm going to talk about an implementation which is in memory, right? I'm going to create a map in memory, which is a map of ID to message instances. I'm going to add messages to that map. I'm going to remove from that map. I'm going to get messages from that map. Okay, so the first thing I've added here is a profile model object. So this is very similar to the message model object, which has the ID, the message, the created date, and the author. The profile is basically ID, the profile name, the first name, last name, and created, right? So it's very similar structure. Even this is annotated with XML root element, and it has a convenience constructor like the message object, which takes in these arguments and sets the object. Now, instead of having this stored in a database, what I will do is create a database class, which is basically a static class which has a couple of static maps. So there is a messages map which maps ID to message, and then there is a profiles map which maps ID to profile. So any class in the application can access the entire map of messages and the entire map of profiles by calling these static methods. So there is a get messages, which returns the message map, and there is a get profiles, which returns the profiles map. So this is our stub for a database. This would ideally be a JDBC or an Hibernate class which connects to the database. But here what I'm doing is I'm just storing this as a static variable so that every class and every object can access this. One thing to note, this is not thread safe because this is there is no concurrency protection over here. I have done this because I'm under the assumption that there's only one person, one developer who's learning Jersey on your machine and they're connecting to this class. This is, of course, just for learning purposes. Please don't write code like this in production. Okay, so with this set, now what I want to do is in my message service, all I need to do is do a database class dot get messages and then write methods to delete a message, to update to this messages map. Okay, so I'm going to do that next. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my message service. I'm going to create a local member variable called messages, which is a map of long and message. And I'm basically getting the messages from that static instance, right? So I'm doing a database class, which is a static call, dot get messages, to get this instance of messages. And every time there is a new instance of the service, it still points to the same instance of messages. So that way I can add a message in one request, update it in another request, and it'll still be there. As long as you don't restart the server, it'll be there. So it is handy for trying out new things and learning as we're doing now. Okay, so now this is something that I can remove. I'm gonna have a list of all messages, which is basically messages dot values, right? So this I want as a list. So I'm going to do a new array list of messages dot values. So this returns a list of all the values of the map, which is all the messages that we have in the map when this is called. So I'm going to create similar methods to get one message, to update a message, and to delete a message. So I have get message, which takes an ID, and it does messages.get of that ID. Add message takes in a message as an argument. Now this is something that needs to figure out what the ID of the message is, right? So when a message is added, think about what the database does, right? It finds out the primary key, the last primary key, and increments it by 1, for example, and then it returns that ID. So it basically, the added record has that ID in it. So that's what I'm doing over here. So I'm just doing a messages.size, and I'm adding 1 to it, so I get the next element, and I set the ID of the new message to that number, right? So the messages.size plus 1 is the new ID. And then I do messages.put. I'm putting it to the map, the ID that I've just generated, and the message. So I'm adding something to the map. And then I'm returning the message that was added. So you get the ID back as the response, right? The message with the ID is sent back as the return. And update message is fairly simple. So I'm accepting a message as usual. Now the message should have an ID set when it's doing an update. So if the ID is less than 0, I just return null. If the ID has a value, then I do a messages.put of that ID as the key and the message as the value, and I return the message itself. Remove a message is also fairly straightforward. I accept an ID, which is the long, and then I do a messages.remove. So messages is a map, so .remove with an ID is going to return the value that was removed. So I'm going to return that. So this method returns the message instance that was removed. So very straightforward. This is a bare bones message service, which hooks up to a static message. So multiple operations is going to return the same consistent response. So you add a message and then you do a get all messages. That message is going to be there. So that's really cool. So back to the message resource. Now I do a message service.get all messages, right? So let's test this and see if this works. So I'm going to start the server, run on server, and I'm going to switch to Chrome and enter the request URL, which is messenger web API /messages. Doing a get request. If I hit send, well, I get nothing back. Why is that? Because we've removed the hard-coded list of messages. So there is nothing in the database class, right? It's a new hash map, so there's nothing in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constructor over here to just seed a few messages, right? So I'm going to do a public message and add a couple of messages. So it's the same two hard-coded messages list. Oh, this is message service, sorry. So this is the same couple of messages. I'm just putting an ID 1 long, and I'm creating a new message, which is ID 1 hello world. I'm doing a messages.put ID 2, and then I'm creating a new message with ID 2 hello Jersey with the author Kaushik, right? So there are two hard-coded messages that I'm adding whenever the message service is instantiated. So I'm going to save this and let's try that again. Now if I do a message resource get all messages, it should return those 2 messages. Let's try that. Hit send again, and there you go. We have 2 messages. So what we've done is pretty much created this backend, this fake backend for us to play with. We can add messages, remove messages, and all that stuff. That's going to be handy when we move on to other operations in the message resource. Again, most of what we did in this lesson is not Jaxaris, it's not Jersey, but it's kind of like the foundation required for us to start doing these different CRUD operations in Jersey. So that's what we're going to do next. In the next tutorial, now we have a list of all messages, right? In the next tutorial, we're going to get one message given an ID. See you in the next tutorial, and thanks for watching.